I married Raymond because he was the son of my former boss, and 4 years ago, we tied the knot. Although we haven't started a family yet, our life together has generally been happy. Raymond is dedicated to his work and often travels, which can leave me feeling lonely, but he makes up for it by spending quality time with me when he's home. I first met Raymond through my father, and it wasn't long before he suggested I become a stay-at-home wife. This arrangement gave me the time to pursue my own interests. I took up sewing and knitting, befriended our neighbors, and even started a fitness routine. Every winter, I'd gift Raymond handmade scarves and gloves. At first, my attempts were a bit amateurish, but his appreciative comments over the years encouraged me, and I grew to love crafting even more. I'd often dream of the day when we can sew together as a family. I once shared this thought with Raymond, and he smiled warmly, entertaining the idea of joining me in the future. To outsiders, our life may seem privileged, thanks to Raymond's substantial income. But I never skimped on supporting him, managing the household, and making the most of our time together on his days off. I imagined a quiet, content future with my kind husband and hopefully children. However, 3 years ago, everything changed. One evening, while waiting for Raymond to return home from work, I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed. Raymond rushed back and took me to the hospital where I lay recovering, vulnerable. It was then, to my shock, that Raymond confessed with a smile, "I only married you because you're the boss's daughter." Seeing the scarves and gloves I had made for him discarded and devalued, I was struck with the need to confront him. I wanted him to realize how wrong he was if he thought he could belittle my worth. Despite the hurt, the thought of him eventually recognizing my value brought a small smile to my face. I am Ashley Carroll, and this revelation was a harsh wake-up call about the marriage I had once believed was built on love. When I woke up in the hospital, I overheard snippets of Raymond's conversation with the doctors. It became clear that my condition was serious, likely a lifelong issue, though not immediately life-threatening. Still, the risk of recurrence meant I would need to stay in the hospital for some time. Raymond tried to reassure me during one of his visits, holding my hand gently. "It looks like you'll be here for a while, but don't worry. I'll make time to visit, and we'll get through this together." His presence eased my anxiety, and for a moment I felt that everything might be okay with him by my side. True to his word, Raymond visited almost every day. He asked about my day, and noticing the monotony of hospital life, even brought my favorite sewing tools so we could pass the time together. Teaching my clumsy husband to sew became one of the highlights of my days. It helped me momentarily forget the dreariness of the hospital and feel connected to him. This routine continued for about a year, and I knitted a scarf for him as part of our yearly tradition. But after that, his visits grew less frequent. At first, I thought it was just work piling up, so I kept myself busy with sewing, planning to give him a pair of gloves I was making when he visited next. The doctors told me I'd likely be discharged by the end of the year, and I poured all my energy into crafting the gloves, hoping they would bridge the gap created by our time apart. However, when Raymond finally visited after a long absence, his reaction was chilling. He glanced at the gloves I offered and said, "Are you still making these? It's honestly a nuisance now." He then handed me the scarf I had knitted for him the previous year, untouched and pristine, along with divorce papers. Stunned, I could only stare as the reality of the situation sank in. The scarf was as new as the day I had given it to him, and his cold words marked the painful end of a marriage I had once believed was supportive. "Has it been 3 years since your hospitalization?" he remarked casually. "I heard you'll be discharged soon." His indifference was like a sharp blade cutting through everything I had cherished. "I can't keep taking care of you," Raymond said bluntly, pushing the divorce papers toward me. I stared at them, the weight of his words sinking in. His signature was already on the documents, a clear sign of his resolve. I had suspected this might happen, especially after his visits became less frequent, but I had told myself it was just the stress of work, trying to dismiss my fears. The caring Raymond I had known would have kept me informed, no matter how busy he was. As he stood there waiting for my reaction, I managed to ask calmly, "Why do you want a divorce?" It wasn't desperation to hold on to him that prompted the question, but a resigned acceptance. If the gentle Raymond I loved thought divorce was necessary, maybe he was right. Still, part of me was confused. He had promised we would face this challenge together. Raymond's response was harsh and dismissive. "Isn't it obvious? Ever since I married you, all I've had are troubles." I was exhausted, tired of the scarves and gloves I gave him every year. I only married you because you're the boss's daughter, he sneered, his words cutting deep. How can I be expected to deal with your illness on top of everything else? He laughed, and the sound was mocking, dismissing my affectionate gestures as trivial, and my illness as nothing more than an inconvenience. As his words sunk in, I noticed the high-end scarf he was wearing, one I didn't recognize, certainly not one I had made. It was sleek, expensive, far beyond anything I had ever crafted for him. The realization hit me hard. He had never appreciated any of the scarves or gloves I had poured my love into. In fact, he might have found them irritating from the start. Who can even wear a handmade scarf without feeling embarrassed these days? He said, his voice dripping with disdain. Receiving these things is a nuisance now. I felt a wave of sadness mixed with an odd sense of relief. The sadness came from realizing the man I had loved had changed so drastically. The relief, though, was that now I knew the truth. At least the clarity was painful but necessary. Looking at the divorce papers in front of me, I was struck by the contrast. My hospitalization had been a turning point in our relationship, one I hadn't understood until now. After my father retired, Raymond no longer needed to maintain appearances with me. All those visits he made between work commitments, I now saw them for what they were, part of a carefully crafted act to maintain his image. His workplace must have viewed him as a devoted husband, balancing his career and his wife's illness with grace. The sympathy and praise he received from coworkers made it easier for him at work, and he had used my condition to his advantage. When I finally confronted him about it, he admitted without remorse. If I stayed late, I was diligent. If I needed a break, I just mentioned my sick wife. It made things easier. Honestly, I even got a promotion thanks to you. I have to thank your illness for that. The cold grin on his face made my heart sink. The man I had married, the man I thought I knew, was nowhere to be found. Our conversation ended with me handing him the signed divorce papers. He barely looked at them before saying, "Well, if I could be of help, that's good. We probably won't see each other again. Take care." He left without a second thought, showing no emotion. The divorce itself was a quiet affair, but in the silence that followed, I cried. When I was discharged from the hospital, I returned to live with my parents. My father was furious when he heard the full extent of Raymond's behavior. "I never thought he would be that kind of guy," he muttered in disbelief. But by then, I had found a sense of detachment and calm. I reassured him, telling him I just wanted to move forward. After sorting through my things at the house I had shared with Raymond, my parents supported me, encouraging me to do whatever made me happy. I decided to live with them for the time being, but I wanted one last visit to the house. I needed to collect the rest of my things and close that chapter of my life once and for all. However, when I arrived, I was met with an unsettling surprise. The front door lock was broken. My parents and I rang the doorbell, only to be greeted by a stranger. I asked who he was, and he informed me that he had purchased the house months ago and was now living there with his family. My parents were furious, but I chose not to escalate things. Instead, I walked away quietly, my mind racing with questions. I called Raymond, desperate for answers. He answered casually, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital. I'm keeping the money as compensation. It was my house to begin with, so you have no complaints, right?" His indifferent tone left me stunned, a cold sense of disbelief washing over me. I wished he had told me sooner. From what the new owner shared, it seemed the house had been sold quite a while ago, probably about a year, when my husband's visits had stopped. Although our divorce had been finalized with the signed papers, we had agreed to discuss asset division and compensation after my discharge, planning to meet the following week. Yet my husband had already taken matters into his own hands. His lack of awareness bothered me more than I expected. Over the phone, I said, "You don't understand anything, do you?" Confused, he asked, "Huh? What do you mean?" I replied, "I'll explain next week," and hung up, leaving him with more questions than answers. I turned to my parents, who were clearly worried, and asked my father for a favor. Despite the short notice, he quickly prepared the necessary documents for our upcoming meeting. "I've got it already," he said with determination. "There's not much time, but we'll manage." His resolve was partly fueled by guilt. He had introduced me to my husband, and his anger toward him for what had transpired. We sat together at my family's home, my parents and I positioned in a line, facing my husband, who sat alone on the other side. Despite the tension, he appeared unconcerned, even smirking slightly as the conversation unfolded. He claimed, "I'm the victim here. but I don't intend to demand too much. The proceeds from the sale of the house will suffice." His words were laced with arrogance, as though he were being generous. But his smugness was clear. My father's face reddened with anger, and I placed a hand on him, urging him to stay calm. We had the upper hand in this situation, and I knew it. "There's something important we need to discuss first," I began. At that moment, my father presented a document. "The land on which the house stands is owned by me," my father said firmly. I turned to my husband. "The house was in your name," I acknowledged, "but the land belongs to my father." The revelation hit him hard. Though he tried to mask his surprise with a dismissive tone, his eyes betrayed him. "So what? The house was mine. No one has the right to complain. You think you can retaliate with that?" I remained calm. "Yes, the house was in your name, and you probably checked that there were no legal issues with selling it. But let me explain the broader implications." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle in. "You're right, there was no problem with you selling the house. But think about the family who bought it. They own the house, but not the land. If my father decides to, he could demand rent from them, which would cause serious issues." I allowed that to sink in for a moment before continuing. "Of course, neither my father nor I intend to demand rent or evict them. We're not here to cause trouble. However, we can't just give up the rights to the land either. What we propose is selling the land directly to the family, ensuring they have full ownership. That way, they won't face any future legal disputes, and neither will you." The new owners, understandably, were upset when they learned of the situation. They realized that any complications stemming from this oversight would fall on the seller, my husband. They were ready to take legal action if necessary, which visibly unsettled him. I watched as his face turned pale, the realization of the mess he had created settling in. I could see that Raymond finally understood the severity of his mistake. His voice trembled as he asked, "What should I do?" I smiled faintly, keeping my composure. "The best course of action would be for the family to purchase the land from us. That way, they can fully own both the house and the land, resolving any legal ambiguities." I continued, "Of course, they weren't aware they needed to buy the land when they bought the house, and they will likely seek compensation for this unexpected expense. Given the prime location of the land, it could cost more than the house itself." This placed Raymond in a difficult position, but it was the consequence of his own decisions. By selling the house without considering the land ownership, he had created a complex issue, not only for himself but also for the unsuspecting family who had purchased the house. Now, he faced the potential financial fallout from his actions, which could include compensating the new owners for the cost of the land to fix the situation. Raymond's options were limited and financially perilous. If he gave up all his assets, he'd be left with nothing. Alternatively, he could attempt to buy back the house and pay for the land, along with a relocation fee for the family currently living there. This would return the property to his possession, but given the significant costs, especially the relocation fee, it was unlikely he'd make any profit. But beyond the financial mess, there was the issue of emotional damage. I looked at him steadily and said, "Raymond, your actions have caused me significant mental distress. I plan to seek compensation for that. Keep that in mind." Throughout our marriage, Raymond had used me as a stepping stone for his career. Now that I could see his manipulations clearly, I was disgusted by what I had once mistaken for love. I intended to file for damages over the emotional toll his actions had taken, even though proving emotional distress in court could be challenging. Raising the issue, however, was important, especially given his current predicament. As Raymond processed this, my father added fuel to the fire. Despite being retired and no longer working at the company, he had maintained strong connections. "I've been in touch with my old colleagues," he said with a note of satisfaction. "They've been quite vocal about their disapproval of how you've treated my daughter." My father's words drove home the fact that Raymond's reputation at work was deteriorating. His unethical behavior was no longer a secret. As we sat across from him, preparing to discuss the terms of property division and compensation, my demeanor was calm but firm. "Now that you understand the situation, we need to settle the division of property and compensation," I stated, clasping my hands and offering a smile. It was a smile very different from those I had given him during our marriage. This one came from someone who had reclaimed their power. Raymond, visibly shaken by the weight of his financial and social collapse, could only manage a forced laugh, his eyes brimming with tears. The negotiations that followed were decidedly in my favor. Resigned to this fate, Raymond agreed to the terms, which included paying me alimony. This meeting wasn't just about dividing property, it was a moment of realization for Raymond, a stark reminder of the consequences of his actions. It marked the end of his manipulative tactics. With every decision made, I felt a sense of closure, of empowerment, finally turning the page on a challenging chapter of my life. We agreed that Raymond would buy the land where our house was located, ensuring the family who had purchased our home could live there without further legal complications. We explained the situation to them, and thankfully, they were understanding and appreciative of our efforts to resolve the matter. In the end, everyone found a resolution that worked for them, except for Raymond. The consequences of his actions began to unfold quickly. The rumors my father had unintentionally set in motion took their toll. His colleagues' perceptions of him shifted dramatically, and his once promising promotion was indefinitely postponed due to concerns over his integrity. These rumors continued to erode his professional standing, ultimately leading to his resignation. While I could attribute his downfall to karma, it was a stark reminder that gains made through exploitation are fragile and can easily crumble. As for me, I returned to living with my parents and started running a sewing class from their home. It wasn't a thriving business, but it was fulfilling. My classes, attended by neighborhood wives and their children, provided a modest income. Though I had once dreamed of teaching my children to sew, life had taken a different turn. Now, I found joy in sharing my skills and passion for sewing with others in the community. This new chapter of my life wasn't just about making ends meet. It was about finding contentment and building a sense of community by sharing what I loved. It confirmed that happiness often comes from the most unexpected places.